Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bracket Breakdown here on the Sports Daily Media Network YouTube channel. Um, just me for now. Mike might or may not be coming. He's caught up with something. So we're just going to go through the regions. I've got them all here. We can do potential upsets, and if there's some questions in the chat, but we're just going to go region by region. And the way that they broke them down was that the East region was first. It came out. Duke was the top seed. They're going to play Siena, the champions, out of the MAC. I was a little bit surprised that Siena fell to a 16. Felt like they maybe did enough to deserve a 15, but committee saw differently. Ohio State and TCU in the 8-9 game. That pod there will be playing in Greenville, South Carolina. That'll be on Thursday. TCU and Ohio State are going to play at 7:10 Eastern Time, and Duke and Siena will play at 9:40. After that game. So an interesting pod there. Ohio State TCU I did have on the 8 and the 9 seeds. Going to be a good matchup there, and the winner will most likely face Duke. All right, in the next pod here, it did get a little bit interesting. St. John's and Northern Iowa at the 5 and the 12, and Kansas and Cal Baptist at the 4 and the 13. This was the first slight disagreement that I had. I had the 4 and the 5 swapped. Thought St. John's did enough to get up to the 4 line last night with their victory against UConn. Kansas with the but it's clear that they didn't love the Big East. UConn, the 2 seed in this region, as you can see down on the right, they're number 6 overall. So, and then with Villanova too. But I was a little bit surprised with that. I thought today, the resumes today showed that St. John's was better than Kansas, but I guess not. They will be playing on Friday afternoon. It'll be Cal Baptist in Kansas at 2 o'clock in San Diego, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So that's 11 a.m. out there in California. And then Northern Iowa and St. John's will be after that, so 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll be Harlan Hummel at Van Gundy and Shahadi out there. So pretty interesting pod there. Obviously, the pedigree with the coaches is something that is really, really cool. You've got 2 of probably the best active head coaches out there right now with Rick Pitino and Bill Self. All right, we've got the rights. I couldn't fit it all on one side here, so this is still the East region, but it's Louisville and South Florida right now, and in the 6-11, and this will be the first game of Thursday. This will be at 12:15 Eastern Time in Buffalo, New York. 12:15. It'll be Anderson and Jim Jackson on the call for this one. Very, very interesting style. 2 coaches that are very similar in their demeanor with Pat Kelsey in Louisville and Brian Hodgson and South Florida. We saw the Bulls today beat Wichita State to win the American Championship. That is a game that I think can be very interesting, and with the unreliable nature of Louisville's three-point shooting, I think we potentially could see an upset there. All right, Michigan State fell to the 3 line. We figured that out pretty early because the East region was the first region unveiled. They'll be playing North Dakota State, and they will be playing on Thursday also. They will be playing at 2:45 Eastern after Louisville and South Florida. So first game of the first session and first game of the second session, most likely, up there in Buffalo. We have definitely a big discussion coming with Michigan State on whether they deserve to fall to that 3 line or not. I don't think so, and a little bit surprised that it did happen, but at the same time, they did reward, a team that won the Big Ten championship today over Michigan State, most likely. All right, so this last little pod here of the East region, we have got UCLA and UCF. These games will be played on Friday in Philadelphia, UConn and Furman, going down there to the Wells Fargo Center. So not too far for the UConn fans. They'll definitely make that thing sound like Stores South. And this one will be Friday afternoon. Furman and UConn will be 12:40 p.m. Eastern Time. And UCF and UCLA will be about 3:10. That'll be Spiro Dides and Jim Spinarkle and John Rothstein. So a pretty interesting region here. We do have somebody in the chat. I'm liking Duke to win over Siena. Me too, and I think everybody else should too. And then we've got what do you think is the most likely first round upset from this region? I think it's definitely South Florida. I don't know if the 12 or the 13 matchups here are the best for an upset, and I think Louisville's a little bit inconsistent, so we might be able to see the times. Rice Barty's asked where I'm finding the times. Let's see. The times are somewhere on Twitter. Oh, maybe this isn't right. Maybe this is it's just somebody's guess. Um, well, this person's guess looks pretty good, so we're gonna go for it now. Um, if I'm getting duped here, then that's on me. But East Region, we do know the locations, and locations are true. And UConn Furman being that first game. But I'm gonna keep looking for a second here to make sure that these are right. Yeah, I'm starting to think that person maybe guessed with the locations. So we're gonna pretend like that didn't happen. Because I don't see it anywhere else from any of the top reporters. Yeah, all right. I'll keep refreshing this every so often, but let's go to the second region, Midwest. Um, we have got the Midwest region here. This is not the second. West was the second one. We've got the West region. Arizona got up to number 2 overall. That to me did show that they did get they did think that today's games mattered a little bit, and we saw it a couple of other places too. Like I said earlier, but Arizona and LIU, this first matchup here, they've got a it's a great story. LIU. It's the first time that they're going to be here in quite a while. They've got a really cool chant, "Fins up," but unfortunately, I think that their game is going to come. Their season is going to come to an end here. The 8-9 matchup is something that I thought was very interesting. Villanova and Utah State. This is a game where I did have them playing each other, but just in the opposite seeds, so it really doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter where. It just matters what uniforms they're wearing. So Villanova limping in a little bit, just the one win against a tournament team this year for the Wildcats, and they didn't get rewarded with it. I had them on the 6 or 7 line for some of the season, but it didn't go that way for them. We have got Utah State there on the 9. This was an early indicator that the Mountain West was probably going to be a one-bid league. Just a little bit of an unfortunate year for them. They didn't quite have the year that they wanted, and I think Utah State is actually my early pick to win this basketball game. I think they're a better team. I think that they beat Villanova here, maybe relatively easily. All right, the next game here is the 5-12 Wisconsin and High Point, and this will be on Friday. No, Thursday afternoon, in Portland, 4:30. Arkansas, Hawaii, the 4:13 game will be at 2 o'clock Eastern. Before it, it'll be Nestler and Haywood on the call, according to this sheet that I'm not sure is true or not. So hang in with me there. But really, really interesting pod here. We have Wisconsin, who's obviously, playing some really good ball, but High Point is a team that's been in the top 100 all year. They took Purdue down to the wire last year as a 13 seed. They did lose Allen Huss to Creighton, their coach, but I think High Point might be able to maybe, if you can just disrupt Wisconsin a little bit, and Wisconsin shoots a lot of threes. We know how inconsistent that can be. So I think High Point might be a little bit of a good pick there to get the victory. Arkansas and Hawaii. Hawaii's been the best team in the Big West for most of the season. They just won their tournament late last night in Las Vegas. I think they're going to stay over here, especially if they're just going up to Portland. They should not go back to the island and back. That would be a lot of unnecessarily traveling for them. But I like Arkansas. I think they're playing really well here, and I think that they're going to be my pick to get to the Sweet 16 in most of the brackets. All right, we have got BYU here up next on the other side of the West region, playing NC State and Texas play-in game. This was a very, very early sign at what the bubble teams were going to be. This game is on Thursday because BYU cannot play on Sunday, and this will be the last game of Thursday, according to the sheet in Portland. So Texas and North Carolina North Carolina State are going to have to go to Ohio. Not particularly close to either school, and then if they're victorious, they're going to have to go all the way out to the Moda Center in Portland to play. So not exactly logistically very sound there. Indiana had to do it a couple years ago. They had to go all the way to San Diego, I think, all the way from Dayton in 2 days. So BYU's certainly going to be liking that part of it, and I think they do get through whoever comes out of Dayton in that game. We got Gonzaga and Kennesaw State in the 3:14. Again, this is also in Portland, so the winner of that game will play the winner of BYU, Texas, and NC State. Gonzaga's had a really solid season. Their numbers are a little bit probably inflated, but they did have a good non-conference part of the season. But on the other hand, that was a long time ago, so we don't know if that's still their team. Miami and Missouri get paired up. Jai Lucas in year one. His reward for having a phenomenal season with the Hurricanes is to go to St. Louis to play Missouri. In state, it is a couple hours, but it's just a really tough draw for the Hurricanes, who I thought deserved a 7 seed. They got it. That it's telling me that this will be Friday evening, 9:55. So one of the late games. That's really bad news for Miami because, if it was Thursday afternoon, maybe some of the Missouri fans don't get out there in time. But Friday night, it's going to be, I would say, a pretty close to a Missouri home game there. So unfortunate for the Canes. And then Purdue and Queens are the other game there in St. Louis, 7:25 Eastern. According to this, Godden, Weber, Andy Katz, Purdue surged up to that last 2 seed with the victory today in the Big Ten Championship over Michigan. I was a little bit didn't exactly see that coming. The committee has not done that before, but they did today with Arkansas going up to the 4 seed, taking a spot of the team that they beat today, in my opinion, and then Purdue doing that on their end as well. They were not playing well coming into the end of the season, but they got rolling and won the Big Ten tournament, so good for the Boilers. Midwest region is third. It's Michigan, number 1 overall in this region. Tough, not a great Big Ten tournament for them. I know they lost in the championship game, but they did limp a little bit to the finish. It was a close game against Ohio State. It was a close game against Wisconsin, and then Purdue got pretty sharp today, and then they beat them pretty convincingly. They'll play the winner of UMBC and Howard. This will be on Thursday in Buffalo. There was a little bit of a conversation there about whether they wanted Buffalo or Philly. Because they fell to number 3 overall, they did not get their request for for Philly. So they're going to Buffalo. Michigan State's in the afternoon there, according to this, and then they are 6:50. So on Tuesday it'll be UMBC and Howard and Dayton. Not as much of a trek from Dayton to Buffalo as it is to Portland, Oregon, for NC State and Texas. The 8-9 game here is very interesting. Georgia and St. Louis. You've got the Bulldogs. Had a really solid season in the SEC, pretty clearly away from the bubble. They picked up a number of big wins over tournament teams. And then the Billikens from St. Louis did not fall to the 10. I thought they might. They had a terrific season as well. They were falling off a little bit down the stretch. They did have 4 of their 5 losses here towards the end of the season, and including in and around this A10 championship. They had lost, their last regular season game by 29 to George Mason. They lost to Dayton in the semis yesterday in the A10. They lost to Dayton February 24th. So not playing, not as good as they have all season, the Billikens. And Georgia's fast, they're athletic, they're big. That is going to be a tough matchup for the Billikens, I think. Gut reaction is that Georgia gets the job done there. All right, Texas Tech and Akron and Alabama and Hofstra in this next 4-5 pod. And I think right now I am going to say that I think if there's some 12 and 13 upsets, this is where they're going to happen. Texas Tech has not been the same since JT Toppin went out. They have won a few games against some good teams, though, without him. And then Christian Anderson did get hurt in the Big 12 championship game, though he will be fine. These games will be Friday evening in Tampa, Florida, so not exactly close to any of the 4 schools. It's not super far from Alabama, and their fans will hope to get down there, but, at the home of the Tampa Bay Lightning, this is where this pod is going to happen, and then it is Friday evening, like I said, so really, really interesting. Hofstra and Alabama will lead off the evening session 3, and then after that will be Akron and Texas Tech. But the Zips and John Gross have gone to 3 straight NCAA tournaments now. They won the MAC tournament after their fellow team Miami lost. I think Akron's playing really well right now. I think they've been here before. They have Evan Mahaffey, somebody who's played Power 5 minutes for Ohio State and Penn State. So I think the Zips right now are going to be my 12 seed upset pick, if there is one. I like this matchup for them. I think they might have enough bodies to throw a Christian Anderson. And then the supporting cast for Texas Tech at times this year has been a little bit lacking. So look for the Zips to upset them right there. Hofstra, Speedy Claxton, and the Pride are going back to the tournament for the first time since before 2000 when Jay Wright was the coach there, and Speedy Claxton was his starting point guard. So happy for Hofstra. They do have Cruz Davis. He was a Iona player for Rick Pitino, and then I think he did go with him to St. John's for a year. He is their best player by far, scores over 20 points a game. So it is going to be hard to match the athletes and the up and down nature of Alabama, but I think Hofstra could make it interesting. I'm not going to call an upset there, but maybe a Hofstra cover. All right, the 6-11 in the Midwest region, definitely the most interesting 6-11 matchup to me. Tennessee did fall to the 6, didn't necessarily agree with that, but it's the 11 seed, which will be the winner of the Miami Redhawks and the SMU Mustangs, 2 teams that were the last 2 teams in the field, according to the seed list, not in terms of when they were selected, but the seed list. So Miami and SMU Wednesday night in Dayton. That'll be a nice home-ish game for Miami, and then if they're able to win, they only have to go to Philadelphia. So not a tough journey for the winner there. But Tennessee, they're going to have their hands full, whoever comes out of there, with Nate Ament and Jacoby Gillespie, and Rick Barnes has a ton of athletes who have some length. That is going to be an interesting one. That will be in Philly. The 3-14 in Philly will be Wright State in Virginia. Wright State comes out of the Horizon League, and Ryan Odom in Virginia, after a tough loss to Duke last night in the ACC Championship. A terrific first year for the Cavaliers. And Tice DeRitter and Malik Thomas. The Cavs, I think, might have they might not have a tough time getting to the Sweet 16. I like this draw for them, and I think they'll be able to do some damage. All right, the last region here, Kentucky and Santa Clara. This is Friday, also in St. Louis, Missouri, so pretty close to Lexington, if I'm not mistaken. So a good crowd should be there for BBN and Santa Clara. Herb Sendek and the Broncos coming over from the WCC. Happy to see them rewarded here with a really solid season. Getting them away from that, play-in game. Like I don't think they necessarily deserve to be there. Some people had them, but happy for Santa Clara. And they've got some bodies too. Like Kentucky's been very inconsistent this year. I don't think this is, an automatic Kentucky win. I think they're going to have to play pretty solid because, they haven't seen the Broncos this year or anybody like them, really. Iowa State and Tennessee State here, also in St. Louis. Going to be really tough for Nolan Smith and Tennessee State. Just not a great matchup, close to Iowa. The Cyclones should get their fans down there. But, great story for Tennessee State. But I think it probably comes to an end here. All right. Well, we've got one more region here. And it is the South region. This was the one where potentially there would be a switch in the number 1 seed yesterday if not, all three of the main contenders didn't lose, but they all did. Florida, Houston, and UConn all lost yesterday, so I think it was, all right, we're just going to leave it. Florida gets the final 1 seed in the South. That means they get the top number 2 seed, which was Houston. So, extremely interesting game here. Let's see if I can load this up. All right, here it is. This will be Friday by the looks of it. Yes, it'll be Friday in Tampa. So Florida gets a relatively good draw here with the fact that Gainesville's a couple hours, maybe 3 hours in the car from Tampa, and they're going to be playing the winner of Prairie View, A&M, and Lehigh in Dayton. That'll be the first game on Wednesday. And the first 4, I expect the Mountain Hawks to get through there, and then Florida to advance from there. Clemson and Iowa in the 8-9 game. This is going to be a very interesting one. This is where I had both these teams. I'm happy for Iowa that they were able to hold on to a 9 seed. There were definitely some reasons to not put them on the 9 seed and maybe push them down to the 10, but not Bennett Starts and Ben McCollum are going to play against Brad Brownell and his Clemson Tigers team, which is down a key player of R.J. Godfrey. But that's going to be one that I'm going to have to look into a little bit more, because Clemson just did beat North Carolina, who's also in this region, just a couple of days ago in the ACC tournament. So that's one that I'll have to look into. All right, this next 5-12, 4-13 pod, very interesting. Also, we have got Vanderbilt and McNeese State, which will be Thursday afternoon in Oklahoma City against Nebraska and Troy. A little bit surprised to see Vanderbilt drop down to this 5 seed, but I think it's pretty clear that this spot was reserved for the loser of the SEC championship and the 4 seed in the last region, with Arkansas obviously the SEC champion. So I think the committee did a good job in this instance of making sure that today's game actually mattered, because that had not been the case in the past. Remember last year it was also Purdue and Michigan in the championship game. Purdue was on the 4 line, Michigan was on the 5 line. The Wolverines won that game last year. They didn't flip them. They did this year with Arkansas and Vanderbilt, which is why I think Keith Gill and the whole committee, they did a really good job here. I think you're going to see a lot of high bracketology scores on the Matrix, and especially after last year. And last year they did an extremely poor job. I think it was good to get back to the basics here. Don't do anything ridiculously crazy, and can we keep them next year? I know that's not how it works, but I wish it was. Vanderbilt and McNeese. McNeese lost Will Wade last year, hasn't skipped a beat. They won the Southland tournament after finishing second in the regular season, but they were right there with SFA for most of the year. And Vanderbilt playing some pretty good ball. They obviously had the brilliant start and then they cooled off a little bit in the middle. And they did get to the SEC championship game. They did beat Florida yesterday by a lot. And if Vanderbilt gets 2 wins and Florida gets 2 wins, we could see that game again in the Sweet 16. Nebraska and Troy. Nebraska definitely not. They're pretty similar story to Vanderbilt, honestly. They started out hot. They were undefeated, a little bit into conference play, and then they sort of hit a wall. And Nebraska has not gotten over that hump again, like Vanderbilt seems to have. So I think if they get to play in the round of 32, I don't know if it's necessarily the best matchup for Nebraska, but at the same time, they're two similarly built teams. So going to have to dive into that one a little bit more. But I don't want to put anything past Troy or McNeese here either. They're two really good teams. I had Troy on the 14 line. I think, they did, with Yale losing today to the Ivy League winner Penn, there was a little bit of a spot opened up on the 13 there. I thought that they would just throw the Ivy League champ there no matter what, even though Penn does line up more as a 14 seed, which is what they did in this bracket here. But Troy, coming out of Alabama, coming out of the Sun Belt, they've won this league 2 years in a row now, conference tournament 2 years in a row now. There's a little bit of a profile that maybe can cause some damage for Nebraska. I'll have to look into it more, but that is something that could be pretty interesting. All right, the 6-11 matchup here is North Carolina against VCU. This will be Thursday in Greenville, South Carolina, so not super far from either one of these schools. We saw VCU today win the Atlantic 10 tournament. They didn't have to beat anybody particularly good until the championship game where they beat Dayton, but based on where they were on the seed list, they would not have gotten in if they lost today. They were behind Miami, Ohio, and SMU in the seed list. But that's seeding. That's not selecting. They didn't have to put VCU up against the other teams on a selection vote, just a seeding vote. So I think there's a chance they might have been out, especially if it wasn't good, but they led from minute 1 to minute 40 against Dayton and put them away. And then in terms of North Carolina, all the numbers do suggest that they should be higher, but they haven't had Caleb Wilson for a little bit now, and they haven't looked the same. It's been a little bit of a not like a complete and total collapse. Like, they still were able to beat some tournament quality teams at home. They beat Louisville at home. They beat Virginia Tech. But they did lose on the road to NC State and on the road at Duke, and then they lost to Clemson in the ACC tournament. So I think a 1 seed line penalty is probably fair. Look, you can't erase what they did all year, but at the same time, they're not the team that beat Kansas at the Dean Dome in November. So I think a 1 seed line bump was fair in this instance, and I think this is going to be a really tough matchup for them. VCU has got some athletes, and Phil Martelli Jr. has the Rams going in year 1. I think there's a lot of good coaches that have gone through VCU, but I feel like that job is just in such a good spot that it doesn't matter if they keep getting victims of the coaching carousel. They're going to find somebody else who can do a pretty good job there too. Illinois and Penn, the 3-14 matchup. This will be Thursday afternoon in Greensville, South Carolina also. And as much as Illinois tries to run, Fran McCaffrey's going to find them. The Quakers and TJ Power. TJ Power dropped 40 today, is 44, I believe, as Penn beat. Penn did such a great job in that game against DL. There are some metric things to be concerned with here. I think actually Illinois blasts them by 25 plus. Penn is not particularly good offensively, and I feel like Illinois has the size to disrupt Power. So I think it's going to be a big win for Illinois. But Penn has a couple of shot makers, and if Illinois is not shooting it well, Penn is. You never know. St. Mary's and Texas A&M here in the 7 and the 10. This is also Thursday in Oklahoma City. This is a really interesting game. I like where these teams were seated. I had St. Mary's on the 7. I did have Texas A&M on the 9 line, but I would rather Iowa have gotten that 9 spot than Texas A&M. Buckyball is very unique. They basically run you up and down the floor the whole game. There's not going to be a whole lot of deliberate sets for Randy Bennett and St. Mary's. They thrive in the half court. So it's really going to come down to who can dictate the terms of this game. Can St. Mary's make it a technical half court game where, sharp cuts and communicating around screens is that how the game goes, or is it going to be a full on track meet where Texas A&M is throwing lobs and hitting trailer threes? And this is about as contrasting styles as you can get here in Oklahoma City on Thursday. This will be a very interesting one. Gut reaction right now is I'm leaning the Aggies. All right, Houston and Idaho are finishing up this region. Kelvin Sampson and the Cougars lost to Arizona yesterday in the Big 12 championship. Perhaps they could have got this one seed if they did. If they did win, but they didn't. But at the same time, this regional, the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight, is in the Toyota Center, home of the Houston Rockets. Not that far from the University of Houston. So if the Cougars can win 2 games here against Idaho, and then the winner of St. Mary's and Texas A&M, they're going to be going to play in front of a pretty nice home crowd in the city limits that they currently reside in. So Houston did get a good draw. It's only up to Oklahoma City for the first 2 rounds. They should get some fans up there too. I know, Houston's down in the southern part of Texas there, but it is something to look out for as Houston will have to navigate through the bracket here. All right, we've got some comments. Thoughts on Akron taking down Bama? Let's see, what region are they? Yeah, Akron is not playing Bama. Hofstra is playing Bama. Akron is playing Texas Tech. I do like the Zips there. Gut reaction, I like the Zips to win that game. I know the way that this looks is a little bit not the most user friendly, but it's what I could do in the time allotted. So we've got I like a VCU Little Run. Thoughts? They're in the South region, are they not? They are. Okay, so VCU would have to beat North Carolina and then Illinois. Interesting. I think Illinois might just have too much size to lose either of these first 2 games. Maybe if North Carolina wins. North Carolina does have some size with Zayden High and Henry Vasar, but Illinois is just such a unique scout to prepare for with all their length and all their Europeans, and everybody can shoot, but they're all super big and strong at the same time. I think that's incredibly hard to prepare for. And if it's VCU or North Carolina, it's going to be on 1 day of rest. So I don't know. I don't really see that. I think Illinois probably gets to the Sweet 16 and gets through, not relatively easily, but I think they get through. And we're coming out of both games thinking that Illinois has got a chance to beat whoever they're playing in the next round. All right, we've got a couple of things, and it looks like Mike is about to hop on. So this is perfect timing. I just got through all of the regions, and we're gonna wait a second here for him to come in. Let me just get him the information. We're gonna take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. All right, welcome back, everyone. We got Mike Kumar here. Perfect timing, Mike, as we got through the bracket there. I do need to fix the background for a second here, but while I do that, what are your on the fly reactions to this committee in this bracket?
Look, I think overall the committee did a really good job. A couple of things that you could have seen gone differently. If Houston had ended up finding a way to win on Saturday, they probably would have hopped Florida and maybe gone onto that one line. But with no other teams winning their conference championship on that two line, paved the way for Florida to stay right there. I think a couple surprises. One, St. John's slipping all the way down to a five, despite being the regular season and Big East Conference tournament champion. I think that was a little bit surprising to me. But overall, I think the committee did an excellent job, comparatively speaking to years past. So,
Yeah,
good job, and I'm excited for this tournament.
yeah, that was my main takeaway. I think they really, after last year, they really had to just not do anything silly or stupid, and they
Yeah,
didn't. And I think it was very clear in the hours leading up to the show that bracketologists seemed to have a pretty good consensus of what the field of 68 would be. And, seed line here or there and all that. But as the bracket matrix scores are going to come in over the next few days, I think it is going to be the highest year for that. Um,
yeah.
but let's start with the bubble, Mike. We have 11 seeds playing in the first 2 days. The first 11 seed matchup um, in Dayton, Ohio on Tuesday is going to be Texas and NC State. A little bit of a fact here: these teams already played, and it's not entirely sure why they didn't avoid this. Keith Gill may have been saying
Yeah.
something about it, but we had to hop on. So these teams have already played in Maui, so it was years ago at this point, um, by these team standards. But after all, I think these teams both deserve to make it, but probably not into the field of 64. So they're going to play in Dayton. What are you looking forward to here?
Yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting matchup. Texas going back to Dayton for yet another year. NC State getting back into the NCAA tournament after an absence last year. Look, Will Wade's clearly done a good job piecing together a team. I know there were probably some higher expectations in Raleigh going into the year, but this is going to be a really interesting game. I think look out for the experience that Texas has. I think that could be a game changer in this one. They've got a little bit more time playing together. And even though it's the coach that beat Texas last year in the first four, Sean Miller, is now coaching the team. So another interesting wrinkle there, putting Texas back in the first four.
And Mike, these two played a thriller in the fifth place game of the Maui Invitational. It was
Yeah.
102 to 97 Texas. Jordan Pope had 28. Vokia Titus had a nice game. Not the best game for Tremont Mark. And then on the side of NC State, they did have three 20-point scores: Quadir Copeland, Paul McNeil Jr., and Van Allen Lubin. So a whole lot has changed since then. This was game 8 for Texas and game 7 for NC State. Now we're obviously 30 plus games into this, but I think this is going to be a good start to the tournament on Tuesday night in Dayton. But let's go to the other first four game, which is going to be in the Midwest region, and it is the Miami Redhawks going up against SMU. The Redhawks get into the field. Um, Rightfully so. They were the lowest seeded at large team in the field, but if you listen to the commissioner, they were actually selected over the three other teams in the first four. So selecting and seeding is a different process that, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense why things happen that way. But Miami's in the field and they're going to get an SMU team a couple of miles down the road from Oxford. But obviously, you happy Miami made it, and what do you got in this matchup?
Yeah, absolutely. Miami 100% deserved it, and it was good to hear that they got the respect from the committee to know that regardless of what had happened in any of the other matchups, really on Sunday, if somehow Dayton had pulled off the win and VCU was in the tournament as an at-large, Miami wouldn't have gotten bumped. With that being said, look, SMU, they've struggled a lot coming down the stretch. They've lost, I think, their last four regular season games, five of their last six. Their only win was a ACC tournament victory over Syracuse. So the ponies they're sliding a little bit right now. but also Miami hasn't looked as great either coming down the stretch. They've kind of found their way to just kind of weasel their way through some wins, really, really tight games consistently. And then when it came to playing some teams for a third time, they met UMass in the first round of the tournament. I think all in all, this is a good loss for Miami, though. If there is such a thing, they've getting a lot more time to get ready for this tournament versus having to, play through, losing in the championship game on Saturday. They got their loss over with on Thursday, some more time, some more reps, and they're back at it again on Wednesday. So I think this is going to be good to reset the clock for Miami of Ohio and propel them to try to get a tournament win.
And in terms of that first matchup, Mike, I did forget to mention it with NC State and Texas. The winner of that game is going to have to go all the way to Oregon to play BYU. Tough, tough draw. Not
Yeah.
only are they the first four, they got to get to Dayton pretty quickly, and then they got to go to Oregon. The winner has to go to Oregon. Not as tough of a draw for the second winner here. Miami or SMU will have to go to Buffalo. I'm pretty sure. Actually, no, maybe not. Let's see here. Philadelphia. So not that far from
Yeah,
Ohio.
not bad.
And then they're gonna get like an afternoon slash evening game on Friday, whereas the let's see here, NC State and Texas might get that second session on Thursday. So tough draw for NC State or Texas, whoever wins that, but at least a little bit of a better draw there for Miami and SMU. All right, that was the bubble, Mike. In terms of the first four out, it was Oklahoma, Auburn, um, somebody else, San Diego State, and then Indiana. I don't think any of those teams had anywhere close to a shot. Um, it for how messy of a year it was in the bubble, it did sort of break pretty cleanly. Like
Yeah.
there's
Well,
not going to be a lot of people that are mad about the field of 68.
the bubble, if you didn't make the tournament, look, you just didn't really deserve it at this point. Auburn, finishing the season one game above 500, you don't deserve to be playing for an NCAA tournament with that. I think the closest team, realistically, Oklahoma was probably one win away. If
Yeah,
they beat Arkansas and get to what that I think that would have been the semifinals against Ole Miss, they're probably in the field.
and
Regardless of how that Ole Miss game goes, I would like to think that they probably would have gotten the job done even though Ole Miss is playing great basketball coming down the stretch. But regardless, Oklahoma was one possession away from knocking somebody off. So off that last four in. So kind of a bummer for Porter Moser's squad, but it's already been announced that he'll be back next year, so that Oklahoma can try to get another tournament run under him.
and not only that, Mike, but it could have been like any game throughout the season, not even just that
Yeah.
game against Arkansas. They had a tough, like buzzer beating loss at Missouri. Turns out that win probably was enough, would have been enough to get them in. I do think SMU is probably the last team selected, if I had to guess. And they have announced that BJ Edwards will be available for the tournament. That could be just straight up lying. Um, there is
It
nothing
could be.
really. There is really nothing to hold them to it if he like is a game time decision and then he doesn't go or something like that. But maybe there was an argument for another team, like SMU not playing well if Edwards was not coming back. Maybe Auburn or Oklahoma could have snuck their way in after that, but um, I think the committee did a good job with injuries this year, Mike. I don't think they completely disregarded them because obviously that's not fair to the other teams, but I don't think they punished them too hard either. Right? We've got let's see, BYU a 6 seed probably have a chance at a 5 if Richie Saunders is still there. We've got Texas Tech who is somewhere on here. They got a 5 seed.
Yeah.
Maybe an
That was
argument
just
for a
surprising.
4 if JT Toppin is still there, or even a 3, and then North Carolina is a 6. Definitely would have been on the 5 line with Caleb Wilson, but I think it was a
Yes.
pretty good, like accurate punishment if that makes sense. You ding them a little bit, maybe a seed line, but you also don't like totally tank them, which wouldn't be fair.
Yeah, and I think you also look at, the committee clearly showed that winning your conference tournament and how well you're playing coming down the stretch does in fact matter, especially when Purdue gets bumped up to a two line.
Yeah,
Realistically, probably looking at like a four. for the tournament. They're able to really bump up their stock, especially by beating one of the best teams in the country in Michigan. This was a weird championship week, not just for the big conferences, but especially the mid majors. I don't. I think the vast majority, I don't have the number in front of me, but of number one seeds in their tournaments did not win, especially in the
Yeah,
mid majors.
yeah,
But it certainly, with the exception of Arizona and Duke, look, all the other ones didn't do so hot. Florida getting knocked out in the semis, Michigan getting knocked out in the championship game,
yeah.
and struggling throughout the tournament.
The contingency brackets today. They always say that, Mike. Oh, we have contingency brackets for everything. I think they actually did this year. Like they
Yeah,
very clearly moved Purdue up. Friday they did say they seeded the first three lines on Friday. There would be no argument like whatsoever to have Purdue a 2 seed on Friday. But they
or
win.
seven in the Big Ten
Yeah,
tournament. Yeah,
and then they beat Nebraska, and then they beat UCLA, and then they beat Michigan. This does change things a little bit, I think, going into future years. You have a team
I,
like Arkansas. Um, Vanderbilt beating Florida yesterday probably would have been enough for them to get to a 4 seed, and then they lose to Arkansas today. Turns out Arkansas is close enough for them to flip them. I do think that this is going to change the mentality behind conference tournaments a little bit, especially the ones that end, Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, I will say I think I was a little surprised that Vanderbilt got it a five.
Yeah.
I really thought that they had earned a four, especially after having that big win against Florida. And then realistically, the game today, it was a lot closer than the box score will read. That game was wire to wire until the last 3 minutes or so. But yes, clearly there's a new narrative here with conference tournaments really mattering, and obviously the selection committee it changes from year to year. And I think that's part of the things where it's tough to read sometimes
Yeah.
because the people that were on the committee 2 years ago, it's a completely different room that might analyze data completely differently. Obviously, WAB is something that's new this year, but there's plenty of other metrics that maybe people on the committee this year didn't value or valued, more than they do now. And that's over a couple years span.
And the very little that we got from the bracket reveal, Mike, which was February 18th, I think, was that the
Mm,
separator at the top was going to be if you had good top of the line wins. For the
yeah,
most part, that did track down the bracket. Wisconsin, a 5 seed, some great road wins. Their numbers put them in the high 20s. That's not a 5 seed. That's more of a 6, maybe even a high 7 seed. They get bumped up because of that. And now I'm looking at the West region here. Missouri can be said the same there. Missouri's quality metrics average is 64. Their net was around
yeah,
60. I don't know where it ended up, but that would suggest that they should be nowhere near the tournament or in Dayton. But they have 6 wins against the field, 3 of them being on the road. So clearly the Tigers from Missouri were pushed up a little bit because of their big wins, too. I don't
yeah.
want this to be like a complete committee glaze session, but I think they did a good job. They were consistent across the board. I think just the only like minor gripe that I can have is this 5 and 4. Whoops, click the wrong button there. This 5 and 4 breakdown in the East region. St. John staying at a 5 and Kansas staying at a 4. I thought that this morning
Yeah.
this morning the swap could be made there, but look, they're going to be playing against each other anyway.
Yeah, at the end of the day, especially at that 5-4 line, it's so marginal because at the end of the day, you're still playing each other. It's just a matter of who's wearing the home versus away jerseys. And so that's, inexcusable gripe to have. If that's all we're bickering about with the committee this year, then it's the best job that the committee has done,
Yeah.
arguably in my lifetime.
Yeah,
And it was more black and white this year, but um, the committee did what they needed to do.
certainly since I started doing bracketology, this is year 5 for me, so yeah, I think things can get messy. Like, I think the protected seeds are pretty easy to gauge. Maybe you get a team 1 seed line off or not, but the 7 through the 10 seeds has been where things have gone like awry over the years. And, we had the Louisville and Memphis thing last year where Memphis was a 5 seed despite, metrics suggesting that they should be just inside the bubble, and Louisville as an 8 seed despite being in the mid teens. There's none
Yeah.
of that this year. I think you can make an
Yeah.
argument to
Yeah.
push a
Louisville got
team,
robbed last year. Oh,
and
man.
Louisville had a better resume last year, Mike, than they do this year, and they're a 6 seed
Yeah.
this year. They have a lot of wins in the back part of quad one. Um, but obviously, very good job for the committee here. I think we have tip times. I saw some tip times somewhere, but nobody else was reporting it, so it might just be a guess from this guy. But is there one matchup that comes to mind for you that you're going to be looking out for here on Thursday and Friday?
Man, I think there's so many good ones. Look, St. John's obviously they underperformed last year, and in Northern Iowa, they wouldn't have gotten a 12 seed had not so many other number ones in their conference tournament lost. But that's a team I'm really excited to see play. They can shoot the ball pretty well this year. Obviously, a great defensive team, and their coach has done an incredible job building that program over the last 20 years. So I think that's a really fun one. And then also High Point, Wisconsin. Look, Wisconsin has had a tremendous bounce back this year. They've had, almost had Michigan's number twice now. So they've looked pretty impressive. But I think those are two games that I'm the most excited to see in that 5-12 region.
Yeah, the Northern Iowa had an injury to their best player. He missed 8 games. I think they went 2-6 in those
Yeah.
in that series. Obviously, they were the sixth seed in Arch Madness, but they were like the second highest ranked team in many of the metrics, and obviously they didn't have to beat the number one seed because um, Belmont was taken out pretty quickly there. But they have like 4 quad 2 wins. This is a team in Northern Iowa that I think can be a little bit better than their seed, and they end up on the 12 line. The way that they've been playing recently, and with their best player, whose name I'm forgetting right now, but they're probably the best 12 seed I would have to imagine right now. Maybe
Yeah.
with the sole exception of John Gross and the Akron Zips. Um, they're playing Texas Tech. Might get one of those teams that have a really key injury. For me, I think this would be my pick for an upset. I think Christian Anderson is okay. He's banged up. The role players have been really inconsistent for the Red Raiders. Akron's got some serious size, especially for MAC standards. I'm gonna look out for this one for a potential upset.
Yeah, especially look at coming down the stretch. Akron, they've just been winning games,
Yeah,
and some of them have been coming down to the wire, but a lot of them they're taking care of business by pretty wide margins. You look at Texas Tech coming down the stretch. Look, they did have that big win at Iowa State. I can't stress a bit enough how big of a win that is. But then three straight losses heading into March Madness here. That certainly is a black mark on their resume. They seem to be limping in a little bit. Hopefully Christian Anderson will be in good enough to shape to be able to give 100% for this one. But 100% this game could happen. I think the 12-5 line this year, you could see a couple of upsets potentially. But aside from that, I don't really think we're going to see much from the 13, 14, 15 line. Just because, look, if I'm being honest, I know we talked about the mid majors. The top teams in the mid majors were better this year than they were in years past. They all seem to lose.
yeah. Not all of them
And
got
when it
here.
yeah, I mean, you look at Belmont would have been a team that I think could have competed. The Naval Academy was another one. The list goes on and on, but I think had those teams been here, we could have seen some more upsets from those 13, 14, 15 seeds. I just don't see it really happening much
Yeah,
this year.
I think that the 13 seeds especially are at least some of the weakest that we've seen. Like I don't
Yeah,
mean this as any offense, but like Hawaii, Cal Baptist, um,
Hofstra and
Hofstra,
Wright State.
and Troy, like I think there was all of those teams were on the 14 line at one point in the projection. And then you had Yale lose,
Yeah.
Navy, like you said, like all these teams would have been 13 seeds probably. So I don't think that we're going to get a lot of action from the 13 seeds and above. Maybe Hofstra would have been my pick, but I just think this matchup against Alabama, Mike, is brutal for them. Like they are like supposed to the way that they have won in the coastal, I believe their league is.
Colonial. Yeah.
Yeah, that they were like the more athletic team that ran up and down the floor and scored a lot. And obviously that's what Alabama does. So I think it's just a tough matchup for the Pride and Speedy Claxton. I think Cruz Davis is an awesome player. He started at Iona under Rick Pitino. He went to St. John's with him, and he's finishing up his career in Long Island and at Hofstra. So I really,
Yeah,
before we saw where Hofstra was going to be, I'm like, oh, I'm definitely going to pick them to advance in at least a couple brackets, but just a really tough matchup against the Crimson Tide.
I think the one thing to look at in that matchup, and I admittedly haven't seen looked much into Hofstra so far this year, but just looking at their box scores,
They're good.
they're not giving up a lot of points.
Yeah, they're no,
Very,
they're good.
very little. Their last several games, they haven't given up 70 points since a loss to UNC Wilmington. That would have been in early February. So it's been a long time. They clearly don't give up a lot of points. That'll be an interesting matchup against my Alabama, who relies on scoring points in bunches in order to win the game. I think Alabama is probably just a little bit more athletic. They're a lot more athletic than Hofstra,
Yeah,
and they'll probably get the job done. But look out because clearly Hofstra is a good defensive team. I don't know what kind of defensive scheme they play. I need to look more into it, but if they can keep it close, if they can keep Alabama from getting uncontested shots, there's a chance.
yeah, and they are. I'm trying to load Torvik here. It's not loading. They are 91st in Torvik. Look, that's one spot or two spots away from Miami, Ohio. They're 24-10 on the season. They grade out pretty solidly across the board. What they are really good at is 2 point defense. They are third in Division One in 2 point defense. That's 44.2%. To me, like that is the prerequisite for an upset. Like you have
Yeah,
got to guard the rim. And the second part of that is not being able to shoot well. Not a great matchup for Alabama, or not a great matchup for Hofstra because Alabama's going to shoot it whether they're shooting well or not. Um, and then
yeah,
on offense, Hofstra is 32nd in the country in percentage, 108 and 3 point rate. So they do give up. They do score a lot of threes. They don't give up a lot of threes. They don't give up a good percentage of twos. So they've had a couple of tough results. They did go to Orlando to play UCF to open the season. They lost by 4. They had a couple of tough road losses in the non-conference to Temple and Columbia, who are both pretty solid teams. They started off play 4-0, lost 5 in a row, and then that was they had one loss since then. And they were really starting to put together some really good defensive
yeah.
performances towards the end of the regular season, and then they started to make some shots in the tournament. So that is why I had them winning. But I just like I said, I just think it's a bad matchup for them. Like I don't know
Yeah.
if they can do it. But I do want
If
to I do want to check out this Akron page here for a second, Mike. So yeah, you can take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one last thing I want to mention on Hofstra is look, they've won 11 of their last 12.
Yeah.
I kept scrolling through the box scores. That UNC Wilmington loss that they allowed 70 points. Aside from that, the last time they allowed more than 70 points was January 24th. So clearly, once they got some injuries back, that team completely shifted. And it's been a completely different team since late January. So look, we'll see what happens. Alabama's going to shoot a lot of shots and they're going to make a lot of shots. But it's just a matter of if they can keep this at if they can keep Alabama in the 70s, they've got a realistic chance of winning this ball game. They really do.
And in terms of them, Mike, I do want to check out how many possessions per game they play in terms of tempo. I did
Yeah.
look at it and I just forgot. But in terms of Akron, they play a little bit faster. They are matched up against Texas Tech. I think with the lack of depth, the Red Raiders might not want to do that. They might want to get into the half court and get Christian Anderson and side pick and rolls and middle pick and rolls and one-on-one ISOs. Akron is 64th in the country in offense, 7th in effective field goal percentage, 14th in threes, 12th in twos. They aren't great defensively, but they're better at 2 point defense than they are at 3 point defense. So that is initially the number that I'm looking at for all these lower seeds to see if they can pull off the upset. Can you guard twos? Because if you can't, it doesn't matter if they're making shots or not. They can take it into the paint and score. But
Yeah.
Akron, Mike, was 10-4 on January 3rd. They are now 29-5, so that is 19 of 20. The one
Yeah.
loss was at Troy in the MAC Sunbelt Challenge. Which look, Troy's a good
Yeah.
team as you can see
They're in
on
the
the
tournament.
13 line. So I think
Yeah.
these two matchups are very interesting from an upset point of view. I would lean Akron a little bit more here to get it done, but I like Hofstra too.
Yeah. And look, Texas Tech, they're basically going to be playing 8 players deep.
Yeah.
And some of those guys are going to probably, like Chris Anderson's probably going to play 40 minutes in this one unless he
Yeah,
gets into foul trouble.
he shouldn't come out unless they're winning
And,
by a lot.
and I think that's the same token with Donovan Atwell, same thing, probably going to play 40 minutes. Jalen Petty, probably close to 40 minutes. There's a lot of things that could go wrong for Tech to be railroaded in this one. And I think that's the issue going into March, right? Is the teams that are built to win in March have a lot more depth. And Tech had that before JT Toppin went out with an injury. That's why I could 100% see an upset pulling off. I'm not making any decisions on the bracket yet, but that's one that I've got circled as an upset bid.
And in terms of tempo for Hofstra, Mike, thought I was I remembered they're 315th in tempo. So talk about some contrasting styles. There's another
Man,
matchup with super contrasting styles that I think we'll go to now. It is the 7-10 matchup in the South region between Randy Bennett and St. Mary's and Bucky McMillan in Texas A&M. This is down there. This is in
yeah,
Oklahoma City. These are two teams that one would prefer to play 50 possessions and let's half court this thing to death, and then another one would like to probably play 100 possessions and not have any sets called out. So this to me is the who's going to dictate the terms of this game, St. Mary's or Texas A&M. I think we're going to find out pretty quick, like maybe by the second
yeah.
media timeout. If this thing is up and down, I don't think the Gales have a chance. But if Texas
No.
A&M falls behind early and St. Mary's like runs the ball, for lack of a better term, they might be able to win this in a half court battle. So this one to me, really, really intriguing matchup.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see quite a dichotomy of fans, especially as like the favorite seed, just having way less fans at the arena than there are going to be Aggies at Oklahoma City. Not a far trip from a lot of those fans that live in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. St. Mary's tiny school, far travel. It's going to be basically a road game for the Gales. And so yeah, it's really going to come down to tempo in this one. If Marukas can really handle the ball at the point and be able to take care of business. This game, I think, is going to be leveling towards St. Mary's, but it's all going to be about can the little guys from the St. Mary's in California can they find a way to slow down the game? And if they can do that, I think they're cruising for a second round date with Houston.
And St. Mary's is playing as fast as they have in years, Mike. They're 290th in tempo. So
Yeah,
just a little bit faster than Hofstra or UCLA or Iowa for that matter. But yeah, and Texas A&M off the top of my head is pretty fast, yet 21st in tempo. So not going to find a bigger range there. In terms of some other matchups, Mike, and we're going to wrap this up pretty quick because I know you got to get somewhere. But what's one other matchup that we haven't talked about yet that you're looking forward to?
Kentucky and Santa Clara. That's a really good one. Look, I think both teams are appropriately seeded. I could have seen Kentucky fall down to an 8 or a 9, but this is going to be another tempo game. I love to see that the WCC is repping 3 teams here in March. Santa Clara going against a blue blood as a team that hasn't really had that much success since Steve Nash way back in the 90s. So this is a game that I'm really excited about. There are going to be a lot more UK fans with the game being in St. Louis. But regardless, this is going to be a really fun one, Sean.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see what Santa Clara can do um, against Kentucky. Like it's a little bit of a different talent disparity, but at the same time, the Broncos have gone toe to toe with Gonzaga last week. They beat St. Mary's
Yeah.
twice. They had some pretty good games in the non conference that they played some other teams around the bubble like New Mexico and VCU and I think they won one of them and lost the other one. I think they beat VCU, lost to New Mexico, if I'm not mistaken. So they've had like a much tougher schedule than I think they probably thought they were going to have when they started the season. But they deserve to be here. I said this before you hopped on, Mike. I'm happy that they didn't get dragged into Dayton. Like this team,
Yeah,
numbers
I
wise, eye
agree.
test wise, clearly a little bit better than the other teams, in my opinion. Glad that it was rewarded for them, but look, you're playing the most expensive team in the country, a couple of hours from their campus. That's their reward for getting up to the 10 line. But the last matchup that I want to get to today, Mike, is um, Miami and Missouri in another seven
Yes.
ten game. Jai Lucas, terrific first year there down there in
Mm.
Coral Gables. Dennis Gates, pretty solid year for him too at Missouri. But this game is also in St. Louis. The Purdue Queens Miami Missouri pod is also in St. Louis. Not the most fair reward for Lucas and the
No, no
Hurricanes.
kidding.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't know how far Columbia is from St. Louis off the top of my head, but it can't be that far. Um,
It's about 2.5, three
yeah.
hours.
So
Yeah.
look, tough draw for Miami and Missouri too. I think some people had them in the last four, and I'm happy they were able to get out of that. They did have some really solid wins, like I said earlier. But this is another really intriguing matchup to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you look at the way that both these teams looked. Look, especially Missouri, you looked at the out of conference, and I think their last non-con game, they lost to Illinois by close to 40 points. That was not a tournament team. Look, Illinois is a great team, don't get me wrong, but they should never lose to anybody by that much. And I think when you looked at that right there, you thought, man, Missouri's going to have a hard time winning any games in the SEC. They responded really well this year in SEC play, clearly got a lot better as the season went on. And happy to see that they've got a legit chance. I think it's kind of criminal to put them in St. Louis. I don't know who in the committee has ties to the Missouri Tigers, but
Well, it was up to
uh,
Purdue, honestly, and that was the closest location to
yeah,
them left. So it's just an unfortunate coincidence, I think.
yeah, it probably is. But man, what an advantage Missouri is going to have there with the home court.
Yeah, and if they can get through to a potential round of 32 matchup, um, you'd have to think that they would have more fans in that game too. And on the other
Yeah,
note, Houston is in the South region, Mike. It is being played at the Toyota Center, which is the home of the Houston Rockets. City
yep.
limits, like that's close if they can win two games. So obviously there is more to just the matchups. Their storylines. The committee says they don't follow those, but look, you don't have to be
They
a
do.
rocket scientist to figure out that they do. But really, really interesting bracket. Mike, I think we'll wrap it up here. You got anything else to add?
And that's all I got. It's going to be a fun March.
Yep. So we will have some contests coming out. We're gonna have a survivor pool, which will be a money buy-in, and then we're gonna have a bracket contest for free, which will result in the winner getting a shirt. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.